What makes us human when the stars forget our names? The question arrived with the cold, riding the static in my suit like a stowaway thought, and it did not leave when the hull tore open or when the sky turned to knives. It stayed while the shuttle coughed flame across a white horizon and skidded helpless into an ocean of powdered light. It stayed when the world went quiet, except for the breathing the suit insisted on hearing. In the silence after impact, the visor filled with my reflection. A pilot too tired to be afraid, still trying to remember a joke told on a station where the windows were warm. The joke was gone. The cold was not. I crawled out through ribs of metal and listened to the planet. Planets speak. Some roar in storms or whine in wind. This one sang like glass, touched by a wet finger, a high silver note rising from below the snow's hard skin. The note quivered when I moved, as if the planet were tuning itself to me. I stood slowly and the song shifted again. "Hello," I said into the helmet because my habits are older than my caution. The horizon was a blade, the light was a wound. The shuttle, my shuttle, lay like a bird that forgot how to be a bird. "Beacon," I said. The suit whispered back, "Emergency signal engaged. Tight beam relay, cycle 60 seconds. I imagined the pulse leaping into the star-bitter dark, a single heartbeat on repeat. I imagined the ships that could hear it and the ships that would pretend not to. The ice sang higher, like something stretched too thin. I took a step. The crust cracked. Sound raced away from my boot in rings. The planet answered in deeper pitch, a choir beneath the choir, a body below the body. The cold moved like a clever animal seeking seams, tasting zippers, deciding which part of me to claim first. A shape lifted from the snow ahead, so smooth my mind tried to call it sculpture. Then it moved. Light lived inside it, like a small sun caught in a cut diamond. The facets did not glitter, they breathed. The thing had a shape, like a woman drawn by someone who loved geometry. It watched me, with eyes not set in sockets, but grown from the same crystal that made the rest. Eyes as lenses, eyes as windows, eyes that held the color of honey poured over frost. I lifted my hands. "Human," I said, because it seemed polite to explain. The suit translated into nothing anyone sane would rely on. The figure did not run. She stepped forward, and the notes in the ice rearranged to greet her. The world sang in key with the shape of her feet. The first sound she made was not a word, but a chord. It came from the chest, not lungs, but the place a heart would be if a heart were made of light and lattice. The chord rang against the ice, and the ice replied. The reply ran up through my boots into my bones. It hurt and it didn't. It felt like someone naming the room. She touched my forearm where the suit was thickest. The contact shivered through the fabric and into me, a warmth that did not burn. The visor fogged from the inside with the first heat I'd felt since falling. She tilted her head, and the chord changed. Softening, the light in her chest pulsed once, and I understood something without language, an invitation to follow. We walked across the bright emptiness to a mouth of dark. The cave's threshold was a lip of glass, thin as a whisper. When we stepped under, the planet's voice grew tender. The ceiling held lines like frozen music, fracture filaments singing when the air moved. The warmth didn't come from air, though. It came from the alien herself, the light in her chest pressing against the cold until the cold allowed it to exist. She guided me by the hand like a child visiting a cathedral. The chamber opened into a room carved by patience, walls layered in blue and milk-white folded around an inner amphitheater. In the center, a ring of stone, not ice, touched the world like an anchor. She placed my gloved hands upon that stone. Heat seeped up, quiet as forgiveness. My suit stopped complaining about the worst of things and returned to the lesser crimes. She touched the side of her face, then my chest, then the stone. She sang, "If singing is a word we can give to chords that make rooms remember." The song did not tell me her name, but it offered me a shape to hold. Lira, I thought, not because she said it, but because the sound fit into my mouth like a note that wanted to be played. When my turn came, I touched my helmet, then my chest, then the stone. "Noah," I said. The suit made the sound a little flatter than it needed to be. Noah Park. Her eyes, the word is wrong, but it is what we have, changed their hue with a microscopic shift, more gold than amber, as if I had added a spice to boiling water. She pressed her hand to her chest. The chord was shorter this time, almost a syllable. Lira of Shards. The shape arrived, as if my mind had learned to hear edges. She pointed outward, toward the bright knives. Another chord, lower, wide. Ish, my head supplied, and below it, a different word not meant for me, we. I learned her language by standing still and letting it pass through me. When she touched the wall here, the wall in another part of the cave sang back. When she pressed her palm to the stone ring, the ceiling changed its tone by a fraction, like a sky that shrugged. The resonance had rules. She taught by example. She did not force the song. She co-sounded with it, the way you match a friend's footsteps on a bridge, so the planks stop complaining. Her body made warmth, the way some bodies make fear, naturally and by design. Beacon, I said again, pointing up. She stilled. The light in her chest dimmed as if someone cupped a candle. She stepped to the stone ring and played a low note that made the hair on my arms stand. The ice above us responded with complexity my ears couldn't hold all at once. She lifted her head, listening. Then she looked to me with a tilt in her shoulders that I recognized after a moment as worry. The suit gave me more comfort than truth. It translated her chord as a map of interference, your signal calling other humans not human enough to be kinder than hunger. Miners first, rescue later, if later still exists. I knew the type. I had flown ships heavy with men who called planets by how much they weighed in currency. They weren't evil. They were endless. Lira placed her palm over my beacon's housing on the suit's left shoulder. The low chord returned, vibrating in the hinge of my jaw. The suit flinched. Beacon power fluctuating, it reported. Her eyes widened, not alarm exactly, concern the way a glacier concerns itself with a river. She removed her hand. The chord faded. The beacon steadied itself in a stubborn pulse. Still here, still here, still here. I touched my chest. I touched hers. No, the place where her light lived. I pointed up. Then I drew a line across my throat, the universal theater gesture for end of show. Her head bowed, as if in prayer. The chord that answered me was sorrow. Even without words, sorrow is fluent. We lived then in a world of learned smallness. My days took the shape of Lira's routines. She watched the ice, listening to hairline songs. She laid hands on the stone ring and hummed warmth into a circle fit for the animal I am. She brought me water that tasted like winter's patience and strips of translucent fungus that held more sweetness than I deserved. In exchange, I offered her stories, which is the only thing I have ever had that isn't too heavy to carry. I gave her the memory of rain that does not sing, and of cities that do, and of coffee that persuades morning to become bearable. I told jokes. They did not translate. She watched my mouth when I laughed and made a sound like a spoon tapping a glass. Touch became its own grammar. She learned the weight of a glove without fear. I learned that the lines in her skin were not decoration, but function. Veins of lattice tuned to different frequencies, channels for light, for heat, for song. When she leaned close, the notes in the cave bent toward her. When I leaned close, the notes bent toward whatever love is that is not yet a word between strangers. At night, which is a lie we invented beneath ground, I would lie on my back with the helmet off for 1 hour, counting breaths as the air allowed. Lira would sit with her back to the stone ring, the light in her chest turned down so the room could keep its stars. We spoke as far as we could. She told me Aish stories with music, how the ice was older than their oldest singers, how the first of them were not born exactly, but found, seeded in seams where pressure had the right idea. They believed selves were notes in a long chord more than names on separate pages. When I said, "We call that family," she added a higher harmony, and the cave sounded like consent. We practiced the body truth of being near, proximity, with nothing asked of it, but the steadying of a pulse becomes its own promise. She would rest her hand near my shoulder, not touching, and the warmth would come the way kindness comes when a kinder person enters a room. I would fall asleep listening to the world hum through her. 3 days in, or 5, time in sealed places is a liar. A streak of iron scratched the sky. The sound arrived after the light, a harsh kettle drum tearing through the planet's delicate choir. We stood at the cave mouth side by side. Lira dimmed her heartlight until she was only shape. The streak cut across the stars with the indifference of a receipt being torn. Miners, my suit guessed with its fraction of a mind. I believed it. I turned my beacon off. The silence in its place was louder. Lyra's eyes found me. She placed her hand over my shoulder where the housing sat. The chord she sang was question and gratitude and warning at once. The warning had a shape I had not yet learned, a ripple inward, a demand for stillness. I held still. In the stillness, the planet spoke from a depth I had not yet heard. The deeper choir held malice like rust holds blood. "They'll find us anyway," I said, useless in English. I pantomimed men with hungry hands. I pantomimed tools that bite. I drew a square in the air for a crate and filled it with a glow I stole from Lira with my fingers. She watched, very still. Then she touched her chest and sang the smallest note I had heard from her, barely a vibration. The ice above us quivered. She led me to a narrower tunnel. We wove through ribs of ice and arrived at a chamber with a ceiling so thin the stars were shapes pressed against it. Lira rested her palm on the floor. The floor sang back like a plucked string. She looked to me with the tilt of someone considering a bad plan that might be the only plan left. I understood pieces before I understood whole. The ice carried sound and heat like stories between friends. The miners would read the bright veins like maps. If we could detune the song, if we could break the heart and scatter the pulse, it would hide the beacon's memory in a cloud of almost rights. To do it, something in Lira would have to stop being whole. I touched the place where her light was most itself. She took my hand and placed it there, holding me to her with a seriousness that felt like a vow. "No," I said, because the vowel fits inside fear perfectly. She answered with a chord that turned the no into a question with a better answer. She lifted my hand like a tool. She set my palm against the ceiling and sang through me. The ice above us softened briefly, becoming an instrument. I felt my bones respond, a hum I couldn't help. The ceiling's music shifted a hair to the left of where it had been. The shift made the room step out of focus, like a person entering sleep. She withdrew her hand. Her light dimmed, not much, but enough to make the room colder for a breath. She watched me, to see if I would call it what it was. Cost. I know a ledger when it shivers. I removed the glove. My hand shook in the air, like a leaf learning wind again. I pressed my skin to her chest. The heat there did not burn. It softened. The chord that rose was richer than the others, like a complex wine given permission to be itself. She leaned into the touch until my fingers felt like they had always been there. Arranging light. "Another way," I said. I knew there might not be one. We walked in circles looking for a door no one had built. We found instead a threshold inside the way we had learned to stand near each other. Share heat, share load, share song. Lira guided my palm away from her light and placed it on the floor. She layered her hand atop mine and hummed. The ice answered, and this time the answer came through both of us. I became a branch in a circuit, a conduit without understanding the diagram. She spoke then, a word the suit could not make small, resonance heart. She touched the place where her light lived, then the ceiling, then my chest. She drew a line from me to her and back to the sky. The suit tried to tell me. Part of her needed to break open to change the song of the world, but if I held some of that note for her, the break would not be only hers, it would be ours. I had asked once, in a different life, what marriage was for. No one had answered better than this. "I will," I said, and the room changed as if the room itself believed vows matter. When the miners came, they came like storm eating its own voice. The horizon darkened with the sort of cloud that behind glass looks like weather and under looks like policy. The first probe stabbed the ice and the planet screamed. The scream did not break anything, but the part of me that still believed discovery and kindness were the same word. Lira placed her forehead against mine, which is not the part of her meant for warmth, but became so in that moment. I closed my eyes because I wanted the first sight I carried into the next hour to be close, not far. We went to the thinnest ceiling. Lira instructed the ice with touch until it remembered how to hold a pattern she wanted to erase. She pressed one palm to her resonance heart and the other to mine. The chord she sang bore weight. The ice took it. The world bent gently, a river being taught the path of least harm. When the time to break came, she did not cry out. The light in her chest fissured into 100 fine lines like lightning slowed until it could be loved. She inhaled a note that had nowhere to go and let it through me into the floor. For a heartbeat, I held a thing I had no right to hold, the shape of her. It was not pain, it was the sudden multiplicity of being more than one thing at once. I was a human body, I was a column of warmed air, I was a hinge of crystal taught to be a door. I was old snow learning to sing her name. Then the note went where notes go when they have done their work, and the room dimmed to a soft blue that meant we were still here. Her knees did not buckle, because her knees were made by a patient God, but her head tilted and stayed like that. I caught her, as if catching meant anything. The cave ceased its perfect tuning and fell into a convenient imperfectness. Above, the miner's instruments read the seam like a foolish man reads a poem, and found nothing they could spend. The probes withdrew. The storm unlearned itself. The horizon returned to the blade it had been. Lira's light was smaller, not gone, rewritten. I pressed my palm to her chest and felt the quiet heat catching its balance. She leaned into the touch, as if the memory inside my hand included instructions, how to be held, how to be unalone. I had thought I knew the shape of gratitude. It turns out gratitude is a winter cleared for planting. I radioed the men whose job it was to measure. I spoke in the voice they had taught me to use on exams. I said, this world is not empty. I said, there is a people here whose bodies are made of what you came to take. I said, you will not die if you turn away. I said, I will help you find new maps if you let me keep this one with the names it was born with. They asked who I was to make claims. I told them my job title and watched it fail to do what a word ought to do. I said, I am the person who crashed. I am the person who was warmed by a stranger. I am the person who learned to hum instead of cut. I am asking you to become the kind of men your future children will not have to apologize for. They called me sentimental in ways that were meant to end the conversation. I asked them to open their comms to receive a file. When they did, I played them the song Lira sang when she made the world different. The sound did what I had hoped. It reached the part of a person that remembers being a child, making a bottle sing with a wet finger. The channel went very quiet. Then the captain, who was not evil and not endless, said, request received. We will not enter the ice. We will hold orbit and ask your command what a good man does when he meets a better story than the one he brought. I turned the beacon back on and changed the word it spoke from rescue to patience. Patience, patience, patience. The cold listened. The cave approved. After, there were days like the ones we had before, but more. Lira walked slower for a time. The light in her chest recovered in crescents. I learned the small chores of care in a place made of listening. How to place my palm on the stone ring and carry heat from her to the room, how to rub warmth into the ridges along her wrists where light gathers when it is lazy, how to turn my body into windbreak without announcing myself a shield. She allowed it, which was the thing itself, the gift deeper than any song. We began to speak beyond the shapes of danger. She told me ice courtship was not possession, but resonance. Two notes learning to share a home without cancelling each other. She said sometimes the best pairs were dissonant at first, because dissonance makes space for longing, and longing teaches a chord to strive. I told her human stories, where love is a house with doors that lock and windows that open, where a person can be entire and still choose to become more than one. In the months that came, my command sent people who listened first. We met at the edge of the ice with hands out and heads bowed. Lira stood beside me as a thing that glowed and did not apologize for it. We spoke of what could be done without harm and what needed to be left alone. The miners left their hunger in orbit and carried back caution that did not shame them to carry. A treaty learned our names before we wrote it down. We wrote it anyway, because paper is how humans remember promises when our better selves are asleep. I did not leave when the first shuttle landed and opened its mouth like a patient animal offering shelter. Lira touched my shoulder in question. I touched hers in answer and felt how the light there had found a new path for itself. Different, not lesser. I said, "Later." She answered with a chord that meant okay, and also meant thank you, and also meant be sure that later exists. We set our work to the construction of a different kind of beacon, not a cry for rescue, but a song that told the truth of where we were. We tuned pillars of ice to hum in concert when storms came, scattering sounds that would confuse greed and lure curiosity instead. We taught human hands to touch the planet without it flinching. We taught the planet to expect a gentleness it had not met before. At night we lay near the stone ring, our shoulders almost touching, and asked each other questions with our bodies. She would hum a note that carried the taste of iron and snow, and I would hum back a note that tasted like smoke and oranges. She would lean until the heat on my arm made the suit unnecessary. I would remove the glove, because sometimes bravery is taking your hand out into the world and leaving it there. We would talk about homes we might make, where a crystal body and a carbon one could keep each other without melting or shattering. We spoke plans in the language of engineers and dreams, in the language of people who have learned not to be alone. If you love human stories in space, subscribe for more. When the treaty ink dried, which is to say, when the ice stopped complaining about us and began to call us by name. A formal delegation arrived with pins and papers and a camera that pretended it wasn't worried about the cold. They asked us to stand beside each other and look like hope. We did not have to pretend. Lira placed her hand on my chest in the exact place she had once broken her own open for me. I placed mine over hers. The chord that moved through us did not need translation. Everyone present felt it. Some cried and disguised it by cleaning their glasses. The miners launched a satellite that would watch storms and warn ships away from seam lines that deserved to be left alone. They named it after a word Lira taught us that meant safe passage between hungry things. I asked for a copy of the map and put it on the inside of my suit where a picture of a family would go if I had one. I thought, this is a family, and decided the map agreed. The day I finally left the cave to ride up to orbit and argue with people who needed my face to believe my voice, the sky lifted us like a parent pretending not to be proud. Lira came to the mouth and stood with arms crossed over her chest, not as refusal, but as a posture of holding. The light in her was strong again. A small fracture near her heart caught the sun and made a rainbow the meek would call accidental. I touched that fracture with 2 fingers and pressed a kiss to the place my map lived. She laughed, a high, bright sound that sent the cave scurrying to find a chord to match it. "I'll come back," I said, which is what all liars say. I meant it. She answered with a short note that the suit refused to translate because translation would make it less. I knew what it was without the machine, a blessing offered to travelers who will need courage in places where it is scarce. She placed her forehead to mine again. We breathed each other's air for a last shared minute, and then I went to the ship, and the ship went to the men who make decisions. Time away is a different cold. It freezes the parts in you that expect immediate answers. It teaches patience new words. I sat under lights that pretend to be suns and explained how to be a good guest to people who still believed we own anything. I showed them the fracture that made the rainbow and told them it was a wedding ring I could not remove. They smiled because they thought I was speaking poetry. I was not sure if I was. When I returned, the planet sang my name without having learned language. Lira met me at the cave mouth with both hands extended, a gesture that meant I am whole enough to share, and not so whole I have no room for you. The cave hummed the low welcome of places that did not die. We stood in the warmth we built and counted what we had saved. The count grew. The count did not need to end to be true. We do not live happily ever after. We live in a place where storms learn our chords and we learn theirs. We live in a treaty that will need mending like a coat. We live between 2 worlds that both demand loyalty. We live as a human and an alien who are teaching each other that love is a technology older than fire and newer than our newest mistakes. We live in a house made of warm stone and humming ice. We live the way hope lives, by practice. Sometimes, when the wind is quiet and the stars lean to listen, Lira will touch the fracture near her resonance heart and say the word for remember. I will answer with a word we made together that means keep going. We are notes in a chord that still has room for others. We are the warmth shared in the cold. We are the story that gets told to miners so they come home with empty hands and full chests. We are people. What makes us human when the stars forget our names? Maybe this: the willingness to stand between hunger and what hunger wants. Maybe this: the decision to learn another body's language with your hands. Maybe this: the promise to return and the work of keeping it. A new routine. 2 lights walking through a singing cave, one made of crystal fire, one of tired breath, teaching each other how to be warm without burning, how to be strong without breaking, how to be we without losing I. Did this story move you? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more emotional sci-fi stories.